This is the first shot of Game of Thrones. I like to think it's evocative of a curtain rising over the stage to reveal the drama that is to come. But it's also symbolic in another way. It's a threshold, and as these three characters cross the threshold into the unknown expanse of the North, the audience is also crossing into an unknown world, the world of Westeros, where Game of Thrones takes place. One of the hallmarks of Game of Thrones is how much the world feels real, feels lived in. In this pilot in particular, it feels like we're joining a world in progress, a world that already exists. Hi, I'm Alex, and this is Muchthink. Today we'll be talking about world building. When we think of world building, we think of the mechanics of the world itself, its history, its mythology. You want your world to feel unique, and the specifics of your world's mythology is part of what separates it from other worlds. Certainly, Game of Thrones would feel different without its White Walkers and dragons. But focus too much on the myth and history, and it becomes a lesson instead of a story. In Winter is Coming, we're introduced to some history, a little mythology, and a dozen new characters, but it doesn't feel confusing. It's instead incredibly effective at orienting us to the world of Westeros. So how do they do it? I think it's primarily by balancing two things, mystery and clarity. Starting with this first sequence, we're given just a taste of the mythology of the world. There are undead creatures in the north. It's used here not for its own sake as mythology, but to create a sense of atmosphere, a sense of place. The show doesn't dwell on it or even explain it. In fact, the other characters don't believe in this mythology, which in its own way tells us even more about the world. For the audience, this is our first mystery. What is up with the north, and why is no one concerned about it? It also serves the purpose of telling us about the nature of the world we're in. It answers the question, what type of world is this? Armed with that information, we have context for the events to come, so we aren't surprised by later episodes when Bran develops psychic powers, or when Daenerys survives fire, or when dragons show up. All because we are first introduced to this world as a fantastic place, even if the other characters don't believe it. As for history, if you're a fan of the show, you know that 17 years ago Robert Baratheon took the crown in a rebellion. But we get just the slightest hint of that in this episode.
You helped me win the Iron Throne, now help me keep the damn thing.
He spent half his life fighting Robert's wars. Your father and brother rode south once, on a king's demand.
And that's it. We really only know that something happened, and it was bad enough to make some characters seemingly uncomfortable with talking about it. This is our second mystery. Just like the little piece of myth gave us a sense of place and a sense of nature, the history here gives the world a sense of taking place at a specific time, but also a sense of longevity, that things have happened here before. These two small, mysterious bits of myth and history help us to feel like this is a world that already exists, and once we have that, we're able to populate it with characters we want to watch. One of the best ways to create compelling characters is through clarity. Make them clearly defined and the audience's interest will follow. Think of our apparent hero.
Winter is coming.
We very quickly understand who Ned is. He's a family man, he's honorable because he swings a sword, but he is gentle enough to handle explaining it to a child. He's also merciful enough to spare some helpless direwolves, but stern enough to make his children care for them. So when he has to decide between disobeying his king for the sake of his family, or honorably accepting a job that will take him away from his family, you understand the conflict. It's clear who Ned is. It's clear what Ned stands for. Simple, right? Well, not everything in this episode was originally so clear. You may or may not know this, but this is actually the second pilot made for Game of Thrones. The original pilot had a different script, a different director, and even a few different actors. Most famously, Daenerys was originally played by Tamsin Merchant, and Catelyn Stark was played by Jennifer Ely. But they also messed up something pretty big.
Is when Jaime Lannister pushes little Bran out the window. Mm-hmm. So that scene ended the pilot, and our friends are watching, and one of them said,
"Now, those two, I don't remember, are they supposed to be brother and sister?"
Knowing the original pilot didn't address this, you can watch the final pilot and notice how many times they refer to Jaime and Cersei as brother and sister. It's a total of 9 times across 3 scenes. It's even the very first thing you hear Jaime say.
As your brother, I feel it's my duty to warn you.
There's really no excuse for missing it. So now when you watch the ending, you understand the weight of the scene is not just the queen having an affair, it's the queen having an affair with her brother. This repetition technique seems simple at first, but it's very easy to make your dialogue sound hokey or on the nose, that is, too obvious.
Forgive me, but it seems that there are not enough for everyone aboard.
It starts to feel unnatural, but sometimes it's just necessary to get the point across, and you have to get creative. In this first Jaime-Cersei scene, the whole conversation is about them being related, so that first line doesn't stick out as much. Later, the topic is treated with a slightly different tone, sometimes almost sarcastically.
Our sister craves your attention.
She has our cravings, our sister.
There's subtext there, even if you don't quite understand what it is yet. Alright, here's the part where I bring it all together. The key to balancing mystery versus clarity, really the key to having a coherent story at all, is carefully controlling the release of information. Too much information is an exposition dump, and nobody wants two characters to sit down and explain the story.
Because if we start talking about it, then we're going to be here all day talking about it, making diagrams with straws.
Too little information, and you risk your audience not understanding key plot points. But get it right, and you can intrigue the audience with a mystery, carry them through an emotional arc. This is why we get just a couple mentions of Robert's rebellion, but 8 mentions of Jon being a bastard.
I'm not a Stark. Lady Stark thought it might insult the royal family to see the bastard in their midst.
No bastard was ever refused to see.
You're Ned Stark's bastard, aren't you? You are the bastard. Bastard. Bastard? Bastard.
You need to know what's important. You need to know when to withhold information, and when to beat the audience over the head with it. I know I make it all sound easy, but really it isn't, as evidenced by Game of Thrones needing a second pass. Maybe there's a related lesson here about not taking any piece of information for granted. What's obvious to you may not be obvious to the audience, but if you manage to pull it off, you may just be able to create something fantastic. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. I hope you liked this video. I really love Game of Thrones, so this is something I've had on my mind for a while now. If you like thinking as much as I do, check out some of my other videos here. I make these to promote discussion, so please discuss with me down in the comments if you have something to add. Thanks so much if you're already subscribed, I'm happy to have you. If you're not subscribed, well, there is a button for that. More videos, more thoughts are on the way, so stay tuned to Much Think.